In just seconds, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't debate Karoline Leavitt. She dismantled her, live on national television. Her words didn't just shake the studio, they detonated across America, leaving millions stunned and forcing a retired judge to confess, "Last night I cried." What did Jasmine Crockett say that turned a political showdown into a national awakening and left Karoline Leavitt frozen on air? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The studio lights hit hard, cold and merciless. They weren't there to make anyone look good. They were there to expose, to strip away the gloss and leave behind only what was real. The room was quiet, but it wasn't calm. It was the kind of silence right before a storm, when even the air holds its breath. Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the stage like she owned it. Every step was confident, practiced, almost theatrical. Her heels struck the floor like a gavel. Her smile was flawless, but empty. The kind built for press photos, not people. Her red blazer wasn't fashion, it was armor. Her hair didn't move. Her eyes never searched. She didn't need to look for anyone. In her mind, she was already the center. Everything about her said, "I came to win. I came to be watched." And then Jasmine entered. No spotlight followed her, no dramatic pause, just the quiet shift of attention, like a cold draft entering the room. She didn't walk fast. She didn't walk slow. She walked like a woman who had nothing left to prove, but everything left to fight for. Her suit was plain, navy, firm, not flashy. It said, "I'm not here for the show." In her hands, there was no sleek device, no thick policy binder. Only a folder, worn at the edges, held together by memory. She placed it in front of her like something sacred. Inside was a letter, creased, old, and written in the kind of handwriting that's slow and careful, like every word matters. And behind it, a photo, a boy in a hoodie, one eye swollen shut, his face young, soft, broken, his story unspoken, but screaming through the image. Jasmine didn't glance at the camera. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any speech Karoline had ever rehearsed. She wasn't here to compete. She was here to confront. The camera held steady on Jasmine for a moment longer, just long enough for the audience to wonder if she might explode or say nothing at all, before the host finally leaned forward, voice calm but laced with the kind of tension that only comes when the next question might set the whole room on fire. The moderator's hands trembled slightly, though his voice didn't show it, yet. He glanced down at the card in front of him, but he already knew the question. Everyone did. It wasn't new. It wasn't safe. It was the kind of question that didn't just ask for answers. It demanded a reckoning. He looked up, first at Karoline, then at Jasmine, then into the cold red glow of the camera. "Tonight," he said, his tone low and precise, "we ask a question that's divided this nation for generations. A question many would rather ignore, but we're not here to look away." A pause, a breath, and then, delivered like a verdict. Is the American justice system truly fair for everyone? The question hit the floor like a loaded weapon, silent, heavy, waiting. And before the air could settle, Karoline leaned forward with a smile so polished it could have come straight out of a campaign ad. She nodded once, calmly, like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Let's be real," she began, her voice smooth and steady. "America isn't perfect. No country is. But we've come a long way." Her tone was clear, confident, not rushed, not nervous. "We've had a black president twice. There are black billionaires, black CEOs. We've got mayors, governors, and judges of every background. If the system was built to keep people down, how did they get up?" She let the question hang there, like she had just proved her point without needing to argue. Her fingers touched the desk lightly, relaxed, composed. "That's not oppression," she added. "That's progress." The room stayed quiet, but it wasn't cold. It was calculating. People were listening. Karoline saw it, and she leaned in a little more. "The system gives everyone the same shot," she said. "It doesn't promise success, but it gives you a chance. What you do with that chance, that's up to you." She smiled again, smaller this time, like she was being reasonable. And if we keep blaming the system every time someone fails, we're not helping them. We're teaching them to give up before they even try. Now her eyes locked on the camera. We can't fix everything by changing laws that already protect everyone equally. Sometimes the problem isn't the rules, it's the mindset. If you walk around thinking you're already defeated, then of course you lose. She folded her hands, resting them on the desk. We should be focusing on building confidence, not spreading doubt. We should remind people they're strong, not tell them they're stuck. Her voice didn't shake once. It was calm, controlled. She knew exactly what she was doing. Karoline's final words hung in the air like a flag planted on a battlefield. But across from her, Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't even blink. And the longer that silence stretched, the more it felt like something far more dangerous than disagreement was coming. Jasmine stayed still, completely still. The kind of stillness that didn't ask for attention. It demanded it. Her hands were folded, her shoulders square, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Not on Karoline, not on the camera, but just past them, like she was looking at something no one else could see. 10 seconds passed, then 15. The audience started to shift in their seats. A cough was swallowed. A pencil stopped scribbling. Somewhere off camera, a stagehand muttered under their breath, unsure if she had forgotten her lines or was simply refusing to play the game. The tension kept building. Not loud, not messy, but slow and deep, like pressure in a sealed room. Some thought she was stalling. Others thought she had frozen. But she hadn't. She was choosing the moment. And when she finally spoke, it was like someone pulling a trigger with no warning. "The system works," Jasmine said, her voice low but steady, "just not for all of us." That was all. One sentence, delivered without emotion, but carrying the weight of 1,000 buried stories. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. She didn't blink. But the effect was immediate, like a cold wind cutting through a room full of warm lights. The simplicity made it brutal. The restraint made it powerful. She wasn't trying to argue. She wasn't trying to persuade. She was stating a fact and daring anyone to say otherwise. Karoline's smile twitched but didn't break. The moderator didn't speak. The room didn't breathe. Because Jasmine's words didn't need volume. They needed silence. And that silence came fast, thick, and absolute. The silence after her words wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the room itself had paused to brace for something deeper, something harder to swallow. And Jasmine, still calm, still centered, let that weight settle before she opened the folder in front of her and began to speak. Not to win, not to impress, but to remember. "I want to tell you about my first case," Jasmine said, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. "His name was Darius, 17 years old, no priors, never in trouble, barely even spoke in class. He spent his afternoons tutoring other kids in math." Her gaze didn't wander, but her words landed with focus, like each one was stepping deliberately into a minefield. "One night, he was walking home, alone. Hoodie pulled tight because it was cold. A liquor store 2 blocks away had just been robbed. 2 officers saw him, said he fit the description. That was it. No mask, no bag, no weapon. Just wrong place, wrong skin, wrong time." She paused, but not for drama, for truth to settle. "They cuffed him on the spot," she continued, still calm, but firmer now. "Didn't call his parents, didn't read him his rights, didn't check the timestamp on the 911 call. They just made him sit in the back of a squad car and wait." Her fingers gently tapped the folder in front of her. "I saw the police report. It was thin, barely a paragraph long, and yet that one paragraph was enough to charge him, enough to strip his name and replace it with a number." She drew in a breath, steady but heavy. "But I had the proof. The tutoring center had security footage. His name was in the logbook. He was across town at the exact time the robbery happened. I thought it would be open and shut. I thought the truth would matter." She let that sentence hang, the kind that begs for a reaction. But there was none. Only stillness, only waiting. "I presented everything," she said, her voice steady but tightening at the edges. "The video, the timestamp, the statement from the tutor who saw him leave. Everything lined up. Everything said he was innocent." She shifted slightly in her chair, the only movement she'd made since she began. But no one in that courtroom looked at the evidence the way I did. They looked at him, just him, a quiet black teenager in a hoodie, and in their eyes that was already close enough to guilty. Her jaw tensed, but she didn't raise her voice. They never asked why the officers didn't question the two white kids walking 5 feet behind him. They never asked why no one checked for prints or surveillance footage at the store. They didn't care about the gaps. They just needed a name to attach to the crime. The air in the room tightened, a silence thick enough to feel on the skin. "He was sentenced to 3 years, Jasmine said, her voice dropping just above a whisper now. 3 years. For existing in the wrong zip code, wearing the wrong hoodie, walking home at the wrong time." Her eyes didn't move, but they carried weight now, directed at no one and yet hitting everyone. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't ask why. He just looked at me, and I will never forget that look. It wasn't fear. It was familiarity, like he had known this was going to happen long before I stepped into that courtroom. She stopped speaking. The room didn't breathe. The stillness wasn't respectful. It was stunned. Jasmine didn't add more. She didn't need to, because what she had just done wasn't performative. It was a quiet, relentless indictment. Not just of a case, not just of a courtroom, but of a system that let Darius fall through the cracks and then blamed him for landing there. Jasmine's story settled over the room like smoke after a fire. Slow, suffocating, impossible to ignore. And just as the weight of it began to take root in silence, Karoline straightened in her seat and reached almost desperately for the cold comfort of numbers. Karoline inhaled, slow and deliberate, gathering herself like someone trying to push back rising water with a perfectly folded towel. Her voice, when it returned, was calm. Too calm. "That was powerful," she said, her words landing like carefully placed tiles rather than convictions. "Tragic, even. I don't doubt your experience. I don't question the pain in that story, but we have to draw a line between what moves us and what guides us." She leaned forward slightly as if trying to lean into reason. "Emotion has a place. Stories have value, but public policy can't be built on emotion alone. We need something more reliable. We need facts." Her hands, which had remained elegantly still all evening, now fidgeted slightly against each other. Because no matter how deeply a story touches us, it's still a single example. We don't make federal law based on one courtroom. We make it based on measurable, provable, repeatable data. She scanned the audience as though daring them to disagree with logic itself. If we want to change systems, we can't do it with feelings. We do it with frameworks, with patterns, with truth that can be verified, not just felt. Her words were cleaner now, flowing faster, sharper, like she had found her footing again, back on ground she could control. "The data shows progress," she continued. "Drop in crime rates, increase in minority-owned businesses, rising graduation rates in underserved schools. If the system were broken the way some claim, those numbers wouldn't exist." Her voice rose, not loud but pointed, like a teacher correcting a student who had confused empathy for expertise. "We have to be responsible. We can't turn policy into therapy. We can't let feelings dictate laws, because when emotion overrides structure, justice becomes chaos." She leaned back slightly, crossing one leg over the other, reclaiming her poise. "Look, I understand where the stories come from," she added, tone softer now, as if trying to clean the sharpness from her edge. "But we have to stay clear-headed. Passion can raise awareness, but it can't replace the rule of law." The silence that followed wasn't heavy like the one after Jasmine's story. It was thinner, colder. A pause born not from reflection, but from discomfort. Karoline had spoken clearly, logically, but the air didn't shift back in her direction. Because what she failed to see was that sometimes facts describe the road, but stories reveal the wreckage. Karoline's logic landed with the precision of a math equation. But equations don't bleed, and Jasmine, without raising her voice or shifting in her seat, turned slowly toward her opponent and broke the air like a blade slipping through still water. Jasmine didn't raise her tone. She didn't sigh. She didn't roll her eyes. She simply turned her head, slow, deliberate, and looked Karoline straight in the face. Her eyes didn't carry anger. They carried something heavier, the kind of stillness that follows too many funerals, too many folded flags, too many names read aloud in rooms just like this one. Then she spoke, voice low but cutting, with the sharpness of truth. "So you think the law doesn't need a heart?" The question didn't come with fire, it came with finality. The kind of question that doesn't ask to be answered, because the silence it lands in already is the answer. A beat passed, then another. Karoline didn't respond. Couldn't. Jasmine didn't look at her again. She turned back to the audience, to the cameras, to the country, and quietly nodded once toward the screen behind her. The lights in the studio dimmed, not dramatically, but just enough for the background to take center stage. A black and white image appeared, almost too quickly. It was a child, 12 years old, standing in a snowy park with a toy gun in his hand. His eyes were soft, curious, caught mid-thought, as if he wasn't ready for the photo to be taken. Beneath the image, a simple caption appeared. Tamir Rice, 12 years old, shot in under 2 seconds. No warning. Jasmine didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. The image loomed behind her like a silent witness. "He was playing," she said softly, hands still folded in front of her. They didn't ask questions. They didn't yell a command. They pulled up, opened the door, and fired. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. The truth didn't need volume. It needed space, and it had it. The screen faded to black, then lit up again. Another face. This one older. A young black woman sitting for a mugshot, her eyes holding something between shock and defiance. Sandra Bland. Pulled over for failing to signal a lane change. Found dead in her jail cell. 3 days later. The caption didn't ask for sympathy. It demanded memory. Jasmine's voice stayed steady. They said she was combative. She asked why she was being arrested. She never made it home. They said it was suicide, but they never explained the bruises. There was no dramatization in her tone, just exhaustion, just a retelling of what too many people already knew, and too many chose to forget. The screen changed again. Philando Castile, a still from the police body cam footage. His eyes were focused ahead, his girlfriend beside him, a child in the back seat, told the officer he had a licensed firearm, reached for his wallet, shot 7 times. Jasmine's voice lowered, almost into a whisper. He did everything right, told the truth, kept calm, complied, and they still killed him. She paused. The silence was no longer still. It was tense, thick, sacred. His daughter watched it happen from the back seat. That's the memory she lives with now. Another shift on the screen, a face half lit, another name, another caption, another time someone didn't make it home. Jasmine didn't narrate them all. She didn't need to. The images spoke now, faces fading in and out behind her. Names, dates, locations. Some had been on the news, others barely made headlines. Some were still under investigation, most weren't. The audience no longer shifted in their seats. They didn't look down. They didn't check their phones. Even the moderator's notes stayed untouched in front of him, his fingers curled against the edges like he was holding on to something he didn't want to drop. Jasmine took a breath, not for herself, but for them. "You say we can't write policy with emotion," she said, finally breaking the silence again. "But tell me, what part of these stories isn't policy?" Her voice didn't rise, but it did tighten. The stop that never should have happened? That was policy. The officer who never faced charges? That was policy. The silence that followed? That was policy too. She looked out across the studio, not accusing, not pleading, but pressing, gently, relentlessly. What you call emotion, I call memory. What you call anecdote, I call evidence. And what you call progress, I call names that never made it home. The screen faded again. This time nothing appeared. Just black. Just void. She turned her body slightly, finally looking back at Karoline. Not to debate, but to finish. "You want data?" she said. "Here it is. Name after name. Case after case. Do you need a spreadsheet to believe they were real?" A long pause followed. Not awkward, not performative. Just heavy. "Because I promise you, their families never got a graph. They got a call, or a knock at the door, or silence that lasted for the rest of their lives. Her voice softened again, but the softness wasn't weakness. It was a warning. You say the law should be cold. I say it's already too cold. Cold enough to watch a child die and call it compliance. Cold enough to erase a life with paperwork. Cold enough to call what's happening fair just because it's legal. Jasmine stepped back from the desk, not to walk away, but to let the weight of everything she'd said settle like dust in a room that had just stopped breathing. So no, she said finally, we don't need less feeling. We need more, because laws without compassion are just rules, and rules can kill too. The silence still hung in the air, thick with names and memories. But Karoline, refusing to lose the floor completely, shifted the conversation again, this time toward personal responsibility and inter-community crime, trying to pull the weight of the discussion away from systems and back onto individuals. But Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't retreat, and absolutely didn't let it slide. Karoline straightened in her chair, her voice sharper now, stripped of the softness she had used earlier. At some point, she said, we have to talk about accountability. We have to talk about choices. If we're going to be honest, we can't ignore black-on-black crime. We can't blame the system forever if people don't take responsibility for their own communities. Her tone was tight, fast, like someone trying to outrun the gravity of what had just been said. She kept her eyes forward, trying to sound firm, reasonable, in control. We have to stop encouraging a culture of victimhood, she added. No one's saying the system is perfect, but at some point, we all have to look in the mirror. It was the kind of argument that sounded logical on the surface, but Jasmine knew exactly what was buried underneath it. She didn't react right away. She didn't jump in. She let the words sit there, exposed and fragile. And then, with a stillness that made the room lean forward, she spoke. You keep asking why people don't rise, she said, her voice low but clear. But never ask how many ladders the system already pulled away. Her gaze cut across the table, not with anger, but with the weight of someone who'd seen too much to pretend anymore. Don't just ask the poor why they didn't climb, she continued. Ask how many times they were shoved back down before they even got a chance. Her words weren't fast, they were deliberate, controlled, but each one landed like a hammer against glass. You want to talk about black-on-black crime? She said, her voice steady. Then let's talk about neighborhoods where resources were stripped for decades, schools that were defunded before the first bell rang, playgrounds left to rot, grocery stores replaced with pawn shops and liquor stores, and the only thing the city invested in? She paused, eyes unwavering. Police. The word echoed, not shouted, just heavy, just true. When you over-police and underfund a community for a generation, she said, you don't get safety, you get a pressure cooker, and when it blows, you stand outside and point fingers at the people still inside the flames. The audience didn't move. Not even a breath was wasted. And don't talk to me about responsibility, she went on, because we show up, we vote, we march, we organize, we open small businesses, we raise families, we rebuild every time the system fails us. But responsibility without opportunity is just survival dressed up as choice. Her hands stayed on the table, but her presence filled the room now, dense, unmoving, undeniable. You want to ask about crime? Ask about the policies that built desperation. Ask about the housing discrimination that kept families trapped. Ask about the wages that don't stretch past the 15th of the month. Her voice didn't tremble, didn't waver, because she wasn't searching for sympathy. She was naming facts. Then she stopped, just long enough for the room to feel the silence again. And in that quiet, she delivered the final line, not shouted, not forced, but sharpened to a point. If success is possible for everyone, she said, why do only some ever get to survive failure? The room was already quiet, but Jasmine's last words had changed the silence. No longer stunned, but searching. And in that stillness, she turned, not just to Karoline, but to the audience itself, her voice shifting from resistance to reckoning. She looked out over the crowd, scanning the rows like she wasn't just speaking to them, but for someone sitting in the back, someone who had been waiting a long time to be seen. Let me ask the men in this room something, she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying weight without ever rising. Especially the ones who've worn a uniform, who've sweated in factories, who've hauled concrete, who've bled on foreign soil and come home believing you'd earned a fair shot. She paused just long enough to let the image settle. If you worked your whole life, followed the rules, paid your dues, and then watched your son get denied for a loan, same paperwork, same income, same credit score, but a different shade of skin, would you still say this system is fair to every child? Her words didn't echo. They stuck, like the kind of question that doesn't ask for an answer, but demands a reckoning. She stepped forward, just one step, but it changed everything. 2 applications, she said. Same numbers, same debt-to-income ratio, same employment history. 1 approved, 1 denied. Guess which one had the black name? Her voice didn't crack. Her hands didn't move. But her presence swelled, like someone pulling receipts straight from the bones of the system. The Federal Reserve's own study says black applicants are 40% more likely to be denied a mortgage, even when their finances match white applicants exactly. She let the number hang in the air like a charge about to ignite. That's not theory. That's not emotion. That's a documented statistical fact. And it's not from 50 years ago. It's right now. The screen behind her lit up again, this time with 2 mock loan applications. Identical numbers, different names. One labeled approved, the other denied. Jasmine didn't look at the screen. She didn't need to. She'd lived it. She'd fought it. She'd read those rejection letters in the hands of people who had followed every rule and still been told no. We keep telling our kids to dream big, she said, her voice lower now, steadier, more personal. We tell them if they study hard, work late, keep their head down, they can build a future. But how do you build when the doors stay locked, even when you have the key? She looked straight into the camera now, like speaking not just to the room, but to every living room, every porch, every barber shop across the country. You want to talk about fairness? She asked. Fairness is when a white man and a black man can walk into the same bank with the same paperwork and leave with the same opportunity. Not just a pat on the back and a pamphlet that says better luck next time. Her hands opened slightly now, not gesturing for effect, but from the simple tension of holding too much truth too tightly. This system doesn't just deny access, she continued. It denies trust. It tells people over and over again, we'll let you try, but we won't let you win. She let the silence build again, not from hesitation, but because some words deserve the space to echo. And don't tell me it's just about the math, she said, because if this were just about numbers, the numbers wouldn't lie in the same direction, again and again and again. Her tone was sharper now, but not louder. It was the sharpness of precision, the sound of someone who had stripped every excuse down to the bone. It's not an accident. It's not a glitch. It's a design. And designs don't change by pretending they're fair. They change when we call them out. Another image appeared on the screen behind her. A map of mortgage rejection rates by neighborhood, color-coded in red and blue. The red areas clustered where black and brown families lived. The blue where white families lived. The pattern was unmistakable. Jasmine turned slightly, her voice softening, not in surrender, but in sorrow. You want to know what hopelessness sounds like? She said. It sounds like a father telling his daughter she won't be going to college this year, not because her grades weren't good enough, but because the bank wouldn't lend him the money, even with 20 years of clean credit. She let that image breathe. And when that little girl asks why, what does he say? That he didn't try hard enough? Or does he finally tell her the truth? That the system they taught her to believe in never believed in them? She turned fully now, back to the audience, her eyes unwavering. You want fairness? She said. Then stop pretending access and opportunity are the same thing. One is printed on a brochure. The other decides where your child sleeps at night. One is a promise. The other is a gate. She exhaled slowly, not dramatically, but like someone laying down something they've carried too long. And if this country truly wants to call itself fair, then it needs to stop asking why some of us haven't reached the top and start asking how many times it let the ground collapse beneath our feet. No one spoke. No one moved. Because in that moment, no one could. The screen behind her dimmed, but the weight of what Jasmine had laid bare did not. And as the room braced itself for another point, another argument, another volley in the debate, Jasmine did something far more dangerous. She sat down, folded a piece of paper in half, and made the studio feel more like a funeral than a forum. She didn't look at the camera. She didn't look at Karoline. She didn't look at the moderator. Jasmine lowered herself into the chair with a slow, controlled motion, like someone returning to the truth after carrying too much of it for too long. Her blazer didn't shift. Her voice didn't break. She reached into her folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, precisely, like it had been held many times before, and placed it flat on the table in front of her. One hand rested lightly on top of it, the other curled at her side, still. The camera zoomed in instinctively, drawn not by action, but by silence. And when she finally opened her mouth, it wasn't to argue. It was to remember. "Tamir," she said. The name hit the room like a drop pin in a cathedral. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. "Sandra." A shift in the audience, not movement, just breathe. The kind people try to take quietly when they suddenly realize they've been holding it. "Philando." 3 names, 3 stories, 3 lives turned into hashtags and headlines, reduced and debated until grief itself became political currency. Jasmine didn't recite dates. She didn't give statistics. She didn't cite articles. She let the names hang in the air like the beginning of a prayer. And then, with quiet finality, she said, "They are not data. They are people." She turned her head slowly, not sharply, to face the audience. Not just the people in the seats, but the ones at home. The ones watching from break rooms, classrooms, living rooms across the country. And her voice, though still low, held a force that was impossible to turn away from. "And if no one in this room," she said, scanning row by row, "is willing to stand up and say they deserve to die, then why are they dead?" There was no reply. None was possible. The question landed like an earthquake. Quiet at first, then total. The kind of silence that no one dares to interrupt. Even the hum of the studio lights seemed to fade. The moderator looked down at his cards but did not speak. Karoline sat still, hands clasped in front of her, her polished posture now stiff and frozen. The audience wasn't just quiet, they were held. Caught in a moment that was no longer about sides or sound bites. It was no longer a debate. It had become something else. Jasmine reached for the folded paper again, not to lift it, but to smooth it with the flat of her palm. It was a ritual now, gentle, deliberate, respectful. "I keep this list," she said, almost as if she were explaining it to herself, "because if I don't say their names out loud, they disappear again. Not just from memory, but from meaning." Her fingers brushed the crease, then paused. "We're told to move on, to forgive, to focus on the future. But how do you build a future if the past still bleeds through the floor?" She looked back up, not with fire, not with fury, but with something colder, something older, the kind of grief that has calcified into a kind of knowing. "People say this conversation is uncomfortable," she said. "Good, it should be." Her eyes swept the room again. "Because for some of us, discomfort is not a moment. It's a daily condition. It's walking through a store and being followed. It's being pulled over and rehearsing how not to die. It's kissing your kid goodbye in the morning and praying that's not the last time." Another pause, another beat. The sound of someone trying not to cry in the third row was barely audible, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't comfort. She didn't slow down. "We've been told to stay calm while watching people we love vanish," she said. "We've been told to be civil while burying friends, cousins, students, sons. And now when we ask to be heard, we're told it's too emotional, too dramatic, too inconvenient." She let the accusation hang. No name attached. But everyone knew who it was meant for. Her hand lifted from the page now. Not for emphasis, just to let it breathe. "These names aren't politics," she said. "They're memories. And if we don't speak them, clearly, loudly, without shame, then the silence will rewrite their stories into something we never agreed to." She leaned back in her chair slowly, folding her hands in her lap. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper now. but it carried with terrifying clarity. So I will say it again. If no one will say they deserve to die, then why did the system treat them like they did? No applause, no gasps, just stillness, the kind that feels sacred. And in that moment, the studio changed. The lights still shone, the cameras still rolled, but the space had transformed from a televised debate into a kind of reckoning, a vigil without candles, a courtroom without a judge. Jasmine sat still, her folded paper in front of her, unmoved. But what she had done, what she had undone, could be felt in every breath that now passed through the audience like a ghost. No rebuttal came. Because what do you say to names that never got to speak for themselves? The moment stretched, and then kept stretching. Not because no one knew what to say, but because they knew in their hearts that anything said next would only prove Jasmine's point. The silence held, deep, reverent, unshaken, until Jasmine finally lifted her eyes one last time. Not to the moderator, not to her opponent, but to the camera itself where the nation waited on the other side, not with questions, but with breath held tight between guilt and recognition. She looked into that lens like it was a person, like it was the eyes of every home that had ever dared to watch without fully seeing. Her gaze didn't tremble. It didn't beg. It reached. "I don't need your pity," she said, her voice steady, clear, and stripped bare of performance. "I need you to listen." It wasn't a plea. It was a directive. She didn't blink. She didn't soften. Her face remained still, but the power behind the words hit like a quiet reckoning. "We're not here to ask," she continued. "We're here because we're exhausted. Exhausted from waiting for silence to save us. Exhausted from hoping that patience would one day be enough." A pause, not for effect, but because the next line didn't need momentum, it needed truth. "We came because we've run out of time to wait for a miracle born from silence." Her voice did not rise, but in that moment it felt as though the room itself leaned toward her, as if every wall, every light, every inch of air had been called into attention. And across the country, viewers sat frozen, remote controls forgotten, phones untouched. Something deeper was happening, a shift, a wound being shown, not for sympathy, but for memory, not to incite, but to refuse to be erased. Jasmine didn't move right away. She let those last words sink in, not only into the air, but into the weight of the moment now fully formed around her like armor. The moderator remained silent. Karoline kept her posture, but the mask of control was no longer airtight. Even the studio crew behind the cameras stood still, not out of protocol, but respect. And then, without another word, Jasmine stood, slowly, purposefully. Her chair scraped lightly against the floor, the only sound in a room where nothing dared to speak. She didn't turn to the moderator. She didn't shake hands. She didn't wait for a commercial break or a closing remark. She picked up the folded piece of paper, now weathered from her touch, and slipped it gently into the inside pocket of her blazer, right where her heart was. Then she walked, but not to the wings, not to the exit behind the stage. She walked forward, straight down the center aisle of the audience, through the long line of seats, past silent faces now watching her, not as a politician, but as something else entirely, a witness, a vessel, a truth they could no longer unsee. Each step echoed, not loudly but precisely, like the beat of a slow drum marking the end of something old, and the beginning of something long overdue. The audience didn't speak. They didn't shift. They simply watched, some with eyes glassy, some with jaws set tight, breath clenched in the throat. Jasmine's pace didn't falter. Her heels struck the floor like punctuation, not for power, but for permanence. As she passed each row, it felt like moving through memory, like she was walking between ghosts, not imagined ones, real ones. Names she'd spoken, names the world had buried in headlines, in hashtags, in silence. Tamir, Sandra, Philando, and the ones she hadn't had time to say aloud. In that moment, the studio didn't feel like a debate stage. It felt like a memorial, a place where something sacred had been said and could not be unsaid. She reached the doors at the back of the audience. Still no applause. No music. No cut to commercial. Just stillness, heavy and full. Jasmine paused for the briefest second, one hand on the door handle. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Everything behind her had already changed. Then with one last quiet breath, she opened the door and stepped out. And the show, though technically still live, had nothing left to show. Jasmine didn't need a standing ovation, and she didn't wait for one. She walked through that room like she was walking through history itself, through pain, through memory, through generations of silence finally broken. But the moment didn't end when the cameras cut. That was just when the echo began. The letter arrived 2 days later. Thick envelope, ivory stock, the kind of stationery people don't use anymore. Unless they were raised in courtrooms and carry their words like rulings. It was handwritten, careful, in slightly shaky cursive. No return address beyond a city and a zip code. Jasmine sat at her kitchen table when she opened it, her fingers still marked with the quiet from the night before. The words read simply, "I served as a judge for 31 years. I once believed I was too old to change, but last night I cried." There was no preamble, no formalities, just the truth of someone who had once signed his name on the sentences that changed lives, and now wasn't sure he had always signed injustice. "I saw in your voice the weight of names I never remembered long enough. You didn't ask for permission to speak. You asked us to remember, and I did. Thank you for not letting silence win." Jasmine folded the letter gently and placed it in the same folder that had carried the names. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. But she sat a little longer in her chair, holding it like a verdict that had come far too late, but had still arrived. In a small town outside Birmingham, a former Marine woke up at 5:30 a.m. like he always did, muscle memory long outlasting the battlefield. He didn't say much to his wife, just made coffee, buttered toast, and opened his iPad. The clip had been saved to his home screen. Jasmine's face froze in mid-sentence, calm, eyes steady, backlit by silence. He hit play, watched it all again. Then he opened the church's newsletter software, found the week's bulletin layout, and deleted the scripture quote at the top. Instead, he pasted her words. "We don't need pity. We need people to listen. We're not here to ask. We're here because silence never saved us." Then he printed it, pinned it to the bulletin board just inside the chapel doors. Didn't sign it, didn't explain it. Just stood for a moment, staring at the printed paper, then nodded once to himself, like a soldier recognizing a new commander, and walked out into the sun. In a quiet suburb outside St. Louis, an older man sat with his son and a plate of reheated leftovers between them. The kitchen TV played the segment on loop. Jasmine's speech, clear, slow, without music or edits, filling the room like a sermon no one had expected. The man, gray-haired, retired teacher, said nothing at first, just chewed slowly, his eyes never leaving the screen. His son sat beside him, one arm draped behind the chair, watching, but less closely. When the clip ended, the father turned to him. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "you need to teach your boy something new." His son blinked. "Teach him what?" The father stared at the blank screen for a beat before answering. "Not just how to succeed, not just how to be smart. Teach him how to survive." There was no anger in his voice, no panic, just a depth. A weight that could only come from having seen too many funerals with boys who had memorized multiplication tables, but not how to keep their hands visible when pulled over. Teach him how to stay alive. At a dusty VFW hall in rural Ohio, a group of veterans watched the clip on an old projector. The sound wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. As Jasmine listed the names, the room fell still, not out of formality, but recognition. These were not their wars, but they understood the gravity of a list that ended in silence. One man in his 70s muttered under his breath, "We trained to take orders." She stood there and gave truth. No one laughed. No one disagreed. After the clip ended, they didn't move for a while. Finally, one of them stood and went to the front board. He erased the schedule for next week's BBQ fundraiser and wrote in block letters, "Next meeting, community dialogue, justice, not just memory." Someone clapped once, quietly. Then they all stood, slower than they used to, but not unsure. And in homes across the country, in small apartments, in nursing homes, in classrooms and bus stations and church pews, people weren't just watching, they were feeling. They were repeating her name, sharing her voice, listening not just for what she had said, but for what they had never dared to say themselves. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't just a clip, it was a call, and it was being answered. The morning sun filtered in through half-closed blinds, casting long, pale stripes across the rows of desks. The air was thick with the smell of pencil shavings, floor wax, and something heavier, something invisible but present. Anticipation. Room 204 at Lakewood High didn't usually feel like this. Mr. Langley's U.S. government class was known for being quiet, respectful, and, if most students were honest, mostly forgettable. But today wasn't most days. At exactly 8:03 a.m., Mr. Langley closed the door, locked it, and pulled down the screen above the whiteboard. He didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. His hand hovered over the projector remote, but his eyes scanned the room first. Every face. Juniors, 16 and 17 years old. Some sleepy, some curious. One or two already halfway through texting beneath the desk. He took a slow breath, then clicked play. The video started without a title card, no music. Just the familiar hum of studio lights and the sight of Jasmine Crockett sitting still in her chair, fingers folded, eyes calm. A few students shifted in their seats. One boy in the back muttered, "Is this another debate thing?" Mr. Langley didn't respond. He crossed his arms and leaned against the podium like he was watching it for the first time too. And then Jasmine spoke. The room changed. At first it was subtle. Phones lowered, not because of a rule, but because the voices on screen weren't shouting. They were telling the truth. Jasmine's words didn't come in fire. They came in cuts, one sentence at a time. Clean, precise, irrefutable. She spoke about the boy named Darius, about ladders being ripped away before anyone could climb, about names turned into silence, turned into hashtags, turned into nothing. And when she asked, if no one will say they deserve to die, then why did they? No one laughed. No one blinked. You could have heard a heartbeat. In the third row, a girl named Aria had tears forming at the corners of her eyes, and she wiped them away quickly, hoping no one saw. In the front, Jamal, who transferred from Jackson just last semester, leaned forward with his elbows on the desk, his knuckles whitening beneath his chin. Beside him, Rachel, who usually doodled through lectures, sat absolutely still, a highlighter gripped tight in her palm like it was anchoring her to something. At 8:27, the clip ended. The room stayed silent. Mr. Langley didn't reach for the remote. He didn't ask a question. He didn't break the moment. It was the kind of silence that deserved a stretch. Finally, after nearly a minute, he stepped forward and spoke. Quietly, slowly. That was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. A few heads nodded, but most were still locked in thought. He looked toward the windows where the light now slanted more directly into the room, revealing motes of dust spinning like time. I had a lesson planned today, something about the legislative process. I was going to show you how a bill becomes law, he paused. But this, what you just watched, that is civics. That is power. That is what it means when government meets the ground. In the back, a boy named Luis raised his hand. Was it real? Yes, Mr. Langley said. Every word. Another hand, Savannah. Did it change anything? He exhaled. Maybe not in Congress, not yet. But it's changing people, and that's where everything starts. He walked to the board and erased the day's objective. Understand the role of the Senate. In its place, he wrote in tall, even letters, who is the system for? Then he set the marker down and turned back to his students. We talk a lot about freedom, justice, equality, but those aren't just ideas, they're decisions. They're built or they're broken by what we ignore or what we face. No one looked away. He gestured toward the blank screen. She stood there, alone, in front of cameras, in front of people who didn't want to hear her. And she told the truth anyway. Not with noise, not with rage, with stillness. He nodded toward Jamal. You saw it? All of you did. Now I want to know, what did it make you feel? Jamal's voice came first, low but certain. Like someone finally said what everybody else pretends isn't happening. Savannah added, "It didn't feel like politics. It felt like a warning." From the side of the room, quiet Arya whispered, "It felt like church." That caught Mr. Langley. He looked at her. She wasn't crying now, just focused. "Why church?" he asked. "Because I didn't want to move. Because it made me feel something I wasn't ready for." He nodded once. "Good." Then he turned back to the board. "Write that down. What did it make you feel? What did it make you see?" Not one student hesitated. Not one complained. Pens hit paper like rain on pavement. Words poured out. For the next 20 minutes, the only sounds in room 204 were the soft scratch of ink and breath. When they finished, Mr. Langley collected nothing. He didn't assign it. He didn't grade it. He just said, "Keep it. Read it again tonight. Show someone who needs to hear it." As the bell rang, students stood quietly, many still reading what they'd just written. Some exchanged glances, small ones, honest ones, no jokes, no loud exits. And one boy, Marcus, usually the loudest in the room, walked past Mr. Langley and said under his breath, "My uncle's name should have been on that list." Then he walked out. Mr. Langley stood alone for a while in the quiet that remained. Then he walked over to the board and erased the question. In its place, he wrote, "If no one says they deserve to die, then why are they dead? JC." Then he sat down and started the clip again for the next class, because the lesson wasn't over. Not even close. The clock on the wall ticked past 7:01 a.m. In a nondescript municipal building 2 hours outside of Baton Rouge, the overhead fluorescents flickered to life in a narrow conference room that smelled like burnt coffee, old carpet, and long-buried tension. 12 uniformed officers sat around a battered table, their backs stiff against cheap plastic chairs. Some wore their duty belts. Others were off shift, summoned here with less than 12 hours' notice. None knew exactly why the chief had called them in early, but the tone in the memo was different. Director, uncompromising, mandatory attendance, no exceptions. Bring an open mind. The last line had thrown them. At 7:03, Chief Harold Sims stepped into the room, a folder under one arm and a portable speaker in the other. He was a tall, weather-worn man in his late 50s, buzz cut gone mostly silver, the corners of his mouth turned down in a permanent line of fatigue. He set the folder on the table, looked at every man and woman in the room, and said simply, "Close the door." An officer near the entrance pushed it shut. It clicked like a vault ceiling. Sims plugged in the speaker. No one asked what was about to happen. They all just watched. Then, without preamble, the screen of his tablet lit up, and Jasmine Crockett's face appeared, frozen mid-sentence. Calm, composed, coiled with purpose. He hit play. There was no music, no graphics, just Jasmine. She started with stillness, then names, then truth. At first, the room didn't react. Arms crossed, expressions locked, years of defense mechanisms held in place. But 10 seconds in, Sims watched a flicker, barely noticeable, in Officer Benton's jaw. Then another, a quiet sigh from Sergeant Torres, who leaned forward, her elbows suddenly tight on the table. Jasmine spoke of Darius. She spoke of courtroom silence. She spoke of hands visible, tone respectful, and still a gun drawn. When she said, "If no one says they deserve to die, then why are they dead?" Chief Sims didn't need to look up to know the air had changed. By the time the video ended, no one moved. It was Sims who broke the silence. "You all know me," he said, his voice steady but rough. "I don't do speeches. I don't hand out TED Talks. But last night, I watched this 4 times. I didn't sleep." He looked at Officer Clay, young, 3rd year on the force, quick to roll his eyes during city council meetings. Clay didn't meet his gaze now. "We've had 3 officer-involved complaints in the past 2 years," Sims continued. "No convictions, no formal discipline. One settled out of court." He tapped the folder on the table. "I can recite the justifications in my sleep. So can you. Procedure followed. Threat detected. Split-second decision. You know the lines." No one responded. "But that clip," he said, gesturing toward the now dark screen, "that wasn't about a split-second decision. That was about the weight of all our decisions. He looked around the room, meeting eyes one by one. Some of you think this doesn't apply to us because we're a small town, because we know our community. Let me ask you something. He stepped forward, palms on the table. When was the last time we reviewed our use of force policy line by line? When was the last time we invited community members to sit with us and talk? Not in a crisis, but in quiet? When was the last time we had to ask ourselves if someone walked away from a stop feeling less human than they did before? The room held its breath. Sims opened the folder, pulled out a single sheet, read aloud. We're not here to ask. We're here because we're tired of waiting for silence to save us. He folded the paper and placed it back inside. Anyone who thinks this doesn't apply to policing, he said, isn't listening. Captain Rourke cleared his throat. Chief, you saying we're the problem? Sims didn't flinch. I'm saying we're part of a system that can be the problem, and if we don't recognize that, we damn well will be. Torres spoke next, quiet but firm. I saw myself in that girl she talked about. Tiana, 14, doing everything right, still stopped, still searched. That could have been me. Hell, that was me. A younger officer, Patel, shifted in his seat. My cousin got pulled over in Atlanta last year. Same thing. Asked to step out for no reason. I never filed a complaint. Figured, what's the point? Silence. And then Sims laid down the proposal. Starting this month, we're opening a public forum, he said. Once a week. One officer, one community representative, one moderator. Unfiltered, unscripted. We're reviewing our training modules, especially de-escalation, and we're revising how we report stops, who we stop, and how long those records are reviewed. Not because we were forced to, because now's the time to do it. Clay finally looked up. This going to be mandatory? Sims stared him down. The badge isn't just about who you protect. It's about who trusts you to protect them. If that's a problem for you, yes, it's mandatory. No one laughed. No one resisted. After a pause, Rourke leaned back and murmured, we should print her transcript. Post it in the break room. Torres nodded. Or the front lobby. Sims glanced at the projector, then back to his team. Print it wherever you want. Just don't forget what it said. He picked up the speaker, turned it off, and walked toward the door. Before exiting, he stopped. You don't have to agree with everything she said, he said, but if that clip made you uncomfortable, that means you heard it right. Then he left. No order, or no salute, just truth. And behind him, for the first time in a long time, 12 officers sat. Not defensive, not combative, but still, listening, changing, together. The sun had almost disappeared behind the skyline when Jasmine finally let herself stop moving. Her apartment was quiet, too quiet for someone who had just turned the country upside down. No advisors, no staff, no cameras, just the soft hum of the air conditioning and the low creak of her leather chair as she sat down at the table by the window. Outside, the city exhaled, horns, sirens, footsteps. Life went on, but in here, everything felt paused, like the walls were still holding the weight of what she had said, what she had unleashed. She reached for the stack on the table. Letters, dozens, maybe hundreds, some typed, some handwritten in nervous cursive, some on lined notebook paper. A few arrived folded into envelopes so worn they looked like they'd traveled decades just to reach her. She picked one at random. It was from South Carolina, a man, late 70s. The handwriting shook slightly, but every letter was deliberate. Ma'am, I watched your speech with my granddaughter sitting beside me. I'm a retired postal worker. Never marched, never ran for office. But last night I cried, not because I hadn't heard those names, but because it was the first time I felt like someone said them for me. Jasmine closed her eyes just for a moment and breathed it in. She opened another. This one was a drawing, a child's hand, clumsy, colorful, bright. A woman with a microphone, big hair, dark suit, a giant red heart in her chest. At the bottom, you made me feel seen. Her throat tightened. The lamplight caught the corner of her old folder, creased, torn, still holding the same letter she'd carried into the studio. She reached for it, gently unfolded the photo tucked inside. Darius. That soft, unsure gaze beneath the shadow of a hoodie. She stared at it for a long while. Another envelope. No return address. Just block letters across the top. Jasmine Crockett. Keep speaking. Inside, a single sentence printed from an old typewriter. They told me I was too loud when I screamed. You were louder when you whispered. Thank you. She sat back in her chair. The city outside was now streaked in deep orange and navy blue. Streetlights flickered on one by one. Somewhere below, a saxophone played softly from a stoop. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The tears had already been shed, in classrooms, in squad cars, in dining rooms across the country. Instead, she sat there quietly, a hand resting gently on the letters like they were sacred. Like they were proof. Not of fame, not of victory, but of connection, of something shared. And in that stillness, as the dusk deepened into night, Jasmine Crockett realized something else. She hadn't lit a fire. She'd simply reminded the world it had been burning all along. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.